Am I happy? No. Am I upset? Yes, I am. I'm devastated right now. It's right for me because I honestly, at this point today, have no idea what I'm going to be doing with the rest of my life.
Ozzy Osbourne was the undisputed Prince of Darkness. For decades, we saw the wild man on stage, the lovable, mumbling father on our television screens, and the icon whose music shaped generations. However, his tragic passing on July 22, 2025, left the world with questions. As tributes poured in, the one person who knew him best, his wife Sharon Osbourne, remained silent. Now, at 72, she is ready to break her silence. What was the devastating diagnosis Ozzy hid from the world? What were the heartbreaking stories of his final days? And what were the emotional last words he spoke only to her? For the first time, Sharon is sharing the heartbreaking final chapter of a rock legend. It started with a fall. Ozzy's silent struggle begins. Before the world ever said goodbye to Ozzy Osbourne, he was already fighting a battle most people never saw coming. And it didn't start with a farewell tour or some big dramatic moment. It started quietly, with a fall. It was back in 2019. Ozzy had a bad fall at his home in Los Angeles. At first, it seemed like just another bump in the road for a man who had already survived decades of chaos, accidents, and wild living. But this one was different. The fall damaged his spine and forced him to get major neck surgery, the kind of surgery that comes with real risks. He later said it screwed all his nerves, and that pain never really left him. But what made this fall even worse was what it uncovered. During recovery, Ozzy was diagnosed with a form of Parkinson's disease. The family didn't tell the public right away. At first, they tried to keep it to themselves, processing what it really meant. It wasn't until a tearful interview in 2020 that the truth came out. Sharon stood by him, calling it not a death sentence, but also admitting that it was rough, really rough. She said, "You get a good day, then a really bad day." And sadly, for Ozzy, the bad days started to outnumber the good ones. But that was only the beginning. What came next tested them in ways no one could have prepared for. The Prince of Darkness in pain. Parkinson's is not a kind disease. It creeps in slowly, then takes over everything. For Ozzy, it meant constant numbness in his arm and this weird, icy cold feeling in his legs. He said he couldn't tell what was from the surgery and what was from the disease. All he knew was that his body didn't feel like his anymore. He opened up about it on his own terms, saying, "I'm no good with secrets. I can't walk around pretending anymore." The man who once ran across stages like a madman now struggled just to walk across a room. His balance was off. His energy was drained. And yet, there he was, still cracking jokes, still pushing forward. But behind closed doors, the fight was brutal. Between 2020 and 2023, Ozzy went through surgery after surgery. Each one felt like the last hope. By the time he got to his fourth spinal surgery, the damage from his earlier quad bike crash in 2003 had come back to haunt him. Metal rods that had been keeping him upright for years were now shifting, causing even more pain. And the second surgery? He said it went drastically wrong and left him virtually crippled. Still, he didn't give up. His final surgery in late 2023 involved placing another rod into his spine. But that was it. He made it clear. No more surgeries. "I can't do it anymore," he said. His voice wasn't angry, just tired. So tired. Doctors had their theories. Years of head banging, jumping, and collapsing on stage. All of that takes a toll. Not to mention the substance use that was once a huge part of Ozzy's identity. Some believe his years of hard living only sped up the disease's effects. It was the cruelest twist. The wild life that made him a legend was now slowly breaking his body. By early 2025, things were different. Ozzy wasn't trying to hide anything anymore. On his Sirius XM show, he gave fans a brutally honest update. His mobility was nearly gone. But he followed it with something only Ozzy could say. "For all my complaining, I'm still alive." That line hit people. Because it wasn't just about survival. It was about fighting for dignity, for meaning, for the chance to keep being Ozzy in whatever way he could. He looked at people younger than him who hadn't made it. And there he was, still here, still fighting. That gave him some strange kind of peace. Through all of it, Sharon never left his side. She wasn't just the woman behind the man. She became his caregiver, his manager, his nurse, and his shield. She made the appointments, tracked his meds, and held his hand when the pain was unbearable. She saw what fans didn't: the quiet tears, the frustration, the fear, and the spark. Even when Ozzy couldn't walk, even when he couldn't lift his head some mornings, that spark was still there. That stubborn firecracker spirit that said, "I'm not done yet." In the background of all this was one final dream: to return home, not just for nostalgia, but for peace. For years, Ozzy and Sharon talked about retiring to the UK. By 2024, they made it happen. But it wasn't the quiet retirement they once imagined. It was more like a retreat, a place to breathe, a place to prepare. Because by then, they both knew what was coming. The final bow. Ozzy's last night on stage. By the time 2025 rolled around, Ozzy Osbourne's body was no longer keeping up with his spirit. Every step was harder, every movement a little slower. And though he'd always said he'd die on stage if he could, those closest to him knew that dream was slipping away. The No More Tours 2 had already been pushed back again and again until it was eventually cancelled altogether. That hit Ozzy harder than most people knew. For decades, the stage had been his safe place, his escape, his fire. Without it, he felt lost. But then, something changed. Instead of chasing cities around the world, an idea was born. Just one final show, one night, one last roar. Not in New York or Los Angeles, but back where it all started, in Birmingham, the gritty industrial city that shaped both Black Sabbath and heavy metal itself. This would be more than a concert. It would be a full-circle moment. They called it Back to the Beginning. It was set for July 5th, 2025, at Villa Park, home of Ozzy's beloved Aston Villa Football Club. It was perfect. A hometown crowd, a historic venue, and if all went well, a reunion with the original Black Sabbath lineup. But behind the scenes, things weren't so perfect. Ozzy's health was declining fast. Sharon, his wife and fiercest protector, admitted he was struggling more than ever. Parkinsons had taken a heavy toll, especially on his legs. Walking any distance was painful. Standing for long was almost impossible. But his voice? Sharon swore it was untouched. "His voice is as good as it's ever been," she said in one interview, and she meant it. His body may have been failing, but that haunting, raw voice? Still powerful, still Ozzy. The weeks leading up to the show were filled with tension. Every rehearsal was a gamble. His doctors had warned him not to push too hard. But Ozzy? He was determined. "I've got one more in me," he told a close friend. Everyone knew this was it. And then the night came. Thousands poured into the stadium, a sea of black t-shirts, leather, and denim. Old fans, young fans, and generations who had grown up with Ozzy's music came together to witness what they knew might be his final performance. As the sun dipped low, the crowd began chanting, "Ozzy! Ozzy! Ozzy!" It echoed across the stadium like a battle cry. Then the lights went down, and the stage exploded to life. There he was, not leaping out, not sprinting across the stage like in the old days. Ozzy sat on a towering Gothic throne, dark and dramatic, shaped like something out of a vampire film. It wasn't just for show. He needed it. But from that throne, with bats carved into its arms and smoke curling at his feet, Ozzy Osbourne was still the Prince of Darkness. The band kicked off with one of his classic solo tracks, and something shifted. That voice, airy, sharp, electrifying, rang out like it was still 1970. Time didn't matter. Pain didn't matter. It was just music, power, and connection. Then came the moment fans had waited decades for. Tony Iommi, Geezer Butler, and Bill Ward joined him on stage. The original Black Sabbath, reunited at last. Between songs, Ozzy was unfiltered, honest, human. "I don't even know what to say, man," he told the crowd of 40,000. "I've been laid up for like 6 years. You've got no idea how much this means to me. Thank you from the bottom of my heart." It wasn't a rock star moment. It was a man, vulnerable and wide open, saying goodbye the only way he knew how, with music. From the side of the stage, Sharon watched it all, her eyes never leaving him. She smiled, but her heart was breaking. She knew this was more than just a concert. This was his final gift to the fans, and his last real burst of life. As the last notes of Paranoid echoed through the Birmingham sky and fireworks lit up the night, the crowd roared. People cried. People held up phones, capturing the moment, not knowing they were filming history. Because what no one realized was this: Ozzy Osbourne had just performed for the last time. And just 17 days later, everything changed. What really happened after Ozzy's last bow? Ozzy Osbourne gave everything he had on that July night in Birmingham. Every breath, every word he sang, it all came from somewhere deep, from a place of sheer will and love for his fans. And once the spotlight dimmed and the crowds went home, what followed was something no one wanted to believe. Behind the cheers and the fireworks, something was quietly slipping away. After that final show, Ozzy was brought back to the quiet of his home in Buckinghamshire. No more guitars were screaming, no crowds chanting his name. Just soft voices, the hum of machines, and the steady presence of his family. Sharon had promised him that he could come home for the end. And now, that promise was being kept. What most fans didn't know was that Ozzy's condition had sharply worsened right after the concert. The adrenaline had masked it that night, but the moment he was off stage, it was clear. His body had hit a wall. By the end of that week, the decline was undeniable. Ozzy barely had the strength to speak. The man who had faced decades of wild living, broken bones, Parkinsons, and multiple surgeries was now fading. But he was home, and he was not alone. Then came the morning that would change everything. It was Tuesday, July 22nd, 2025. At around 10:30, an air ambulance was urgently called to the Osbourne estate. Neighbors saw the red helicopter land in the garden. Medics rushed inside. And for a few hours, there was a flurry of quiet panic as doctors did everything they could. But they already knew. Ozzy had been preparing for this moment for months, if not years. By late morning, the Prince of Darkness, who had terrified parents, thrilled generations, and outlived more headlines than any rock star had a right to, was gone. News of his death broke a few hours later. The family's statement was short, heartbreaking, and painfully real. It wasn't just a PR announcement, it was the sound of a family that had lost its anchor. Signed by Sharon, Jack, Kelly, Amy, and Louis, it read, "It is with more sadness than mere words can convey that we have to report that our beloved Ozzy Osbourne has passed away this morning. He was with his family and surrounded by love." That last part, surrounded by love, said it all. Social media exploded. From Metallica to McCartney, tributes poured in. Some called him the father of metal. Others called him one of the last true rock stars. But all agreed on one thing: music would never be the same without him. Yet while the world grieved loudly, the Osbournes did the opposite. They disappeared from view. There were no TV interviews, no statements from Sharon. It was quiet. That silence from Sharon, that was not just grief. It was exhaustion. It was pain. It was the silence of someone who had fought beside Ozzy every day for more than 40 years, and who had just lost her partner. Plans for a public funeral began to take shape. Ozzy wouldn't just vanish quietly. He was going to be honored the way a king should be. Birmingham, his hometown, would get the chance to say goodbye. The route would go through Broad Street, where the Black Sabbath bridge and bench had already become a sea of candles, fan letters, and worn-out vinyl. But behind those public plans, Sharon was battling a private storm. She wasn't just organizing a funeral, she was staring down the rest of her life without him. Her rock, her wild man, the father of her children, was gone. And no matter how much press coverage or public love they received, it didn't soften the blow at home. Still, there was one thing left Sharon knew she had to do: say something. But it wasn't time yet, because what she had to say wasn't easy. A widow's voice, breaking the silence. In the days following Ozzy's death, the world heard from everyone except the person who knew him best. Sharon Osbourne's silence was a heavy, palpable presence. Then, slowly, tentatively, she began to reach out through quiet, deeply personal gestures, acknowledging the outpouring of love while still guarding her own shattered heart. Her words, when they came, were described as raw and emotional. She didn't rely on publicists or carefully crafted press releases. She spoke as a wife who had lost her partner of more than 4 decades. She reflected on their incredible life together, the madness and the magic, and the profound emptiness his absence had created. She expressed immense gratitude for the support from fans, which she described as a comforting blanket during the darkest time of her life. Her words painted a vivid picture of Ozzy's final chapter. She confirmed the immense physical toll of the last concert and how he had spent his final days surrounded by his children and grandchildren, fulfilling their shared wish to be together as a family in their UK home at the very end. This confirmation was a gift to his fans, a reassurance that the Prince of Darkness did not die alone, but was enveloped in love until his last breath. The grief was, of course, shared by their children. Kelly Osbourne posted a heartbreaking tribute to her father, calling him her best friend. The family's collective mourning was a public yet intensely private affair. Their withdrawal from the world was a measure of their deep bond and the central role Ozzy played in their universe. On July 30th, 2025, the day of the public procession, Sharon and her family shared their grief with the world. The cortege made its way through the streets of Birmingham, a city that had come to a standstill to honor its most famous son. Thousands lined the streets, many in tears, holding signs and throwing flowers. For Sharon, it was a moment of shared sorrow, a profound and public acknowledgement that while Ozzy was her husband, he also belonged to the world. The city's mayor captured the sentiment perfectly, stating, "Ozzy was more than a music legend. He was a son of Birmingham." This public farewell was a crucial step in the grieving process, a way to honor his public legacy before the family retreated for a private funeral. Sharon's courage in these moments was remarkable. She was not just a grieving widow. She was the custodian of a legend. In her statements and her presence, she balanced her personal loss with the responsibility she felt to his fans and his legacy, a role she had played her entire life with him, and one she would now have to continue without him. An undeniable legacy. Even in death, Ozzy Osbourne's story is far from over, and it is Sharon, his steadfast partner in life, who will now shepherd his legacy into the future. Even before he passed, there was a sense that his final chapter would be documented, ensuring that his voice and his story would continue to be heard. Now imbued with a new and tragic poignancy, these projects will serve as the final chapters in the Osbourne saga, guided by Sharon's intimate knowledge. There is talk of a feature-length documentary chronicling Ozzy's final years, his courageous battle with his health, and the monumental effort that went into his last performance in Birmingham. It would be an unflinching, behind-the-scenes look at the man behind the myth, with Sharon's reflections forming the emotional core. There is also the matter of his own words. A posthumous memoir or collection of his final thoughts would be a powerful way to let Ozzy tell his own story. It would delve deep into his health struggles, his reflections on his life, and the importance of his family. For Sharon, such a project would be a way to fulfill a final promise, to make sure his story was told accurately and with the dignity and honesty he deserved. These efforts are more than just merchandise. They are acts of preservation. They are Sharon's way of ensuring that Ozzy's legacy is not solely defined by the Prince of Darkness persona or the reality TV star. She wants the world to remember the fighter, the loving husband and father, and the artist who, until his very last breath, refused to let the music die. The proceeds from many of these legacy projects, including the final concert, are being channeled into charitable foundations, particularly those focused on Parkinson's research, turning this immense loss into a positive force for others. Thanks for watching, fam! If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel. For a more fascinating story, check out the next video that pops up on my screen. You never know what you might discover next.